Okay, welcome everyone to a new episode of Technique Tuesday. This week we're going to be looking at how to perform the Sumo Deadlift with perfect technique. Now I'm going to be splitting the conventional and Sumo Deadlift up into two separate videos. However, as you'll see, the movement pattern and muscle activation pattern for both are actually quite similar. Where according to data from Escamilla and Kolowicki, Sumo deadlifts are harder on your quads and conventional deadlifts are harder on your spinal erectors. Now the main technical difference between the Sumo and conventional deadlift is that with Sumo, your hands are going to be inside your legs, and with conventional, your hands are outside your legs. I think that whether you decide to pull Sumo or conventional should be based on what lift feels most comfortable to you or what lift you're stronger with. But with that said, I would say to really maximize on your strength and development, it might be smart to periodically switch between conventional and Sumo deadlift, just to ensure that you're mastering both basic movement patterns. Sumo may feel a little bit awkward at first, but very well could end up being better suited for your anatomy in the long run. So before we jump into training technique here, let's take a quick look at what muscles we're going to be targeting first. Now, similar to the squat, the deadlift trains simultaneous hip extension, where the hips straighten out on the way up, and knee extension, where the knees straighten out. However, the amount of hip extension far outweighs the amount of knee extension in the deadlift, whereas the squat is much more of a knee-dominant lift. The hip extension component is going to be handled primarily by the glutes and hamstrings. The knee extension component is going to be handled by the quadriceps. And there'll also be a strong isometric spinal extension contraction, which will be handled by the spinal erectors that run all the way up the back. There are also several other isometric stabilizing contractions on the deadlift around the shoulders and the scapulae, meaning the lats and traps will be quite active on this movement as well. But despite the fact that the muscles of the back will play an important stabilizing role on the deadlift, I still try to think of it as a sort of lower body exercise. So I usually program it on leg days with the glutes and hamstrings, quads and spinal erectors being the main muscular targets of the deadlift. Now, because the deadlift involves multiple joints and large muscle masses, it's very conducive to progressive overload and should be trained with relatively heavy weight in a low rep zone, usually no higher than 5 to 10 reps if your main goal is hypertrophy, and 1 to 5 reps if your main goal is strength. And based on my own coaching experience, I would say the deadlift is much more physically and mentally demanding than the squat, so I'd recommend programming it in no more than once or twice per week, even in advanced trainees. Okay, starting from the bottom up, you want to lift in a flat-soled shoe, like Chuck Taylor's or deadlift slippers. You want to use high socks to avoid shin scrapes, and optionally you can use a 10mm lever belt, which is going to increase torso rigidity and force transfer as you pull. You want to approach the bar and stand where your shins are about ½ an inch behind the bar, with the bar roughly centered over the tongue of your shoes when you look down. You want to take a sumo stance by moving your feet as far laterally as they can go while still having your heels in line with your knees once you get into the starting position. You may need to work your way out to full sumo stance, first transitioning from a conventional stance to a semi-sumo stance, where the hands are just inside of the legs, and then gradually make your way out to a full sumo stance over the next few weeks. You may also need to do some stretching and foam rolling on your inner thighs and groin to build up proper flexibility and mobility to get into the wider stance safely. And as you go wider, you're going to want to increase the amount of foot flare, meaning that in full sumo, your toes should be pointing toward the front end of the plates, so flared out by about 30 to 40 degrees. To get your hands down to the bar, you want to think of doing a stiff leg deadlift where you're pushing your hips back rather than just squatting down to grab the bar. And once you can no longer hinge your hips back any further, you want to push your knees slightly forward and out in the direction of your toes as your hips drop down the rest of the way until you can grab the bar. Now, generally speaking, you want to grab the bar with your arms hanging straight down, so right at shoulder width. However, with sumo, some lifters prefer a slightly wider grip so that when you lock out, your hands aren't hitting up against your quads. But for me personally, I'm stronger with the shoulder width grip and I can lock that out just fine. Now, when it comes to the grip itself, you do have a few options. I would say the most common is the alternate or over-under grip, with one palm facing up and one palm facing down. And you will be able to move much more weight with this grip, but to prevent muscle imbalances, you might want to switch up which hand is over and which hand is under from time to time. There also may be an increased injury risk if it causes you to twist at the top a little bit, but I've never had this problem personally, and anecdotally I have heard that bicep tendon tears are more common on the underhand side, but I don't think I've ever actually seen one in my own experience. And this is the grip that I personally use, but you do have a few other options. The double overhand grip is probably the safest, but most people just will end up being limited by their grip strength using it, meaning your deadlift strength may never get to its full potential. Now, one solution is to just use a hook grip where you wedge your thumb between the bar and your fingers. However, from experience, I can say this grip has a pretty painful adjustment period, which just wasn't worth it for me. Now, you can also use straps, which allow for an easy double overhand grip. However, I would recommend doing at least one heavy working set per workout without straps so your grip strength doesn't start to lag behind. And in this video, I'm going to be using the alternate grip, so just be aware of the risks and consider those other options as well. So you want to dig the bar into the base of your hand, really driving your pinky into the bar, which will prevent grip fatigue. And once your grip is set, you want to pack your lats by thinking about pulling the bar in close to you, which is going to prevent the bar from drifting out in front of you as you lift. Now at this point, you want to pull your lower back into a neutral position, creating a stretch in your hamstrings, and you'll want to maintain this flat lower back position throughout the rest of the lift. Now, a little bit of thoracic or upper back rounding is more acceptable and less dangerous. However, if you pull with a slightly rounded thoracic spine, just don't allow it to round further throughout the lift. So without dropping your hips, take a breath deep into your gut as you lean your body weight slightly in front of the bar. In this position, you should be able to draw a perfectly straight line connecting your scapula, the middle of the bar, in the middle of your foot. Now at this point, you can initiate the pull by pulling the slack out of the bar by applying a small amount of upward tension into the bar so that it rises up that 1 millimeter or so and softly comes up against the inside of the plate hole before the plates actually leave the floor. And I'd say this is actually a crucial step that many inexperienced lifters miss or just don't know about. You don't want to, what powerlifters would call, grip and rip the bar, meaning you just grab the bar and immediately yank it up off the ground with all your might, because you might come up solid against the weight of the plates before they actually leave the ground, making the pull more difficult, depleting your energy early on, and potentially throwing you out of position. So once you've pulled the slack out of the bar, you want to lift the weight off the floor with explosive power, leading with your chest on the way up. And to finish out the lift, focus on mainly driving your hips forward. Now you can also think about driving your feet into the floor as you thrust your hips forward. However, focusing too much on driving your feet down can turn the deadlift into too much of a squat, and can cause the hips to shoot up in many lifters. So you really do want to think about the deadlift as a hip hinge, where you're merely driving the hips forward while keeping the chest up. And throughout the concentric, you want to make sure you're holding 3 isometric contractions, one in your lumbar spine, which is going to prevent your lower back from rounding, another in your shoulder blades, so keep your shoulder blades retracted, and a third at your shoulder, where you want to be pulling the bar in tight to your legs. So when viewed from the side, the bar should be moving up in a perfectly straight line centered over the middle of the foot, and it should be dragging straight up against your shins. So to finish the lift, you just need to lock out your knees by straightening your legs, lock out your hips by squeezing your glutes, and then lock out your shoulders by simply lifting your chest up. You don't need to overdo the lockout by leaning your torso excessively backwards, hyperextending your lower back, or pointlessly squeezing your shoulder blades together or shrugging the weight up. Now, when it comes to the negative, many powerlifting coaches will insist that the deadlift is a concentric only lift, meaning that on the negative, you should essentially just let the bar fall down, guiding it with your hands so it lands in the right position for the next rep, but without actively resisting the weight on the way down, like you should do with pretty much every other exercise. Actively resisting the negative is just going to make the deadlift even harder to recover from during the session itself and then in the days following lifting. But with that said, I would say that if you are new to the deadlift or relearning how to deadlift properly, I think it is much more important that you make sure each and every rep is as consistent as possible. So I'd recommend controlling the negative, having it last for about 1 second or so that you can begin the next rep with perfect control without risking losing your position. But I would say, regardless of the eccentric tempo, you want to lower the weight down by setting your hips back first, just like you would in a stiff leg deadlift, until the weight is just about to clear your knees, and then you can allow your knees to bend and let the bar hit the ground, finishing the rep in a perfectly straight line. And if you don't set your hips back at the top first and initiate the negative by bending the knees first, chances are that you'll have to move the bar forward to avoid hitting your knees on the way down, which is going to throw off your starting position and waste a bunch of energy. So you want to let the plates come to a full and complete reset on the ground after each rep, so don't bounce the plates off the ground, and then begin the pull again by taking a deep breath in, pulling the slack out of the bar, driving your hips forward, locking the bar out, and setting your hips back, following the bar back down in a perfectly straight line. So guys, because the deadlift is such a technical lift, there are so many errors here, often with pretty complex solutions. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna follow up here next Tuesday with the conventional deadlift technique. And then the next Tuesday after that, I'm gonna do all of the form errors on both variations, so you guys can stay tuned for that. But before we go, I wanna say that for the launch of this video, I'm gonna be offering my fundamentals hypertrophy program and push-pull legs intermediate to advanced programs at 25% off each for the next week. So you can grab both of those at jeffnippard.com for $29.99, and you can learn a little bit more about them, put some information up here, or you can read more at the first couple of links down there in the description. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to leave me a like if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys all here in the next episode.